Hello. So in today's lecture, we're going to explore one concept which really is about the language of operations. If you remember, one of the learning objectives for this course is getting you to use the language of operations. The reason for that is if we're trying to compare, for example, a process in health service with a process in manufacturing to a process in a bank service center, how do we describe it so that we all understand the characteristics of that process? So this session is really focusing on something called the 4Vs framework, which helps us to describe any operations process. But first we have to start with the systems concept. What is a process? Well, a process consists of inputs, transformations, and outputs. And in operations management, we distinguish between those inputs that are transformed. For example, when you buy some flour, milk, and butter, and you mix it together and bake it to make a pie crust, those are transformed resources. And transforming resources. In this example, it would be the stove. That's a transforming resource. So we have two forms of input, things that we change and things that enable us to change. Those inputs into the transformation process are really what help us to end up with the goods and services that our customers receive. So whenever we're thinking about operations processes, always think about the input process output model. So that's our starting point. The second thing we need to be aware of is that the output of nearly every process is some combination of a tangible physical good and an intangible service. So we call that the goods service continuum. And here we've got an example of between a pure good and a pure service. Some operations have a very high mix of goods and services, some do not. So let's take a look at a pure good. For example, crude oil processing, highly automated, very standardized, only one output, essentially only one input, and everything's dedicated to taking crude oil and processing it to gasoline or to other forms of output, gas, for example. At the other extreme, we have a pure service psychotherapy clinic. So if you go to see a therapist, what do you take away that's physical at the end of the process? What do you take away that's physical during the process? Nothing, really. It is, as it's described, a psychological shift. And that's a good example of a pure service. But in between, we have this continuum of different types of businesses, different types of operations that have a mixture of goods and service. Let's take restaurants. If we compare McDonald's with a high-end Michelin 2-star restaurant, McDonald's, we know it's low cost. You go there for food, you're in, you eat it, you spend 20 minutes max, and you're out. So high good content, very little service experience. I mean, sure, you take your kids, they get a Happy Meal and a toy, or they play on the jungle gym, but that's about it. However, when you go to a Michelin 2-star restaurant, a large part of it is the theatre, it's the experience, it's the way that you're treated, it's the environment. I often think about one experience I had at a restaurant in San Diego called Ocean Air. Absolutely fantastic. It was my wife's birthday. We told them it was her birthday, that we were in no rush. We spent about 2.5 hours at the restaurant. Honestly, I can't tell you what we had to eat, but I do know we had a fantastic time. I know that the meal was good, I know the wine was good, I know the service was good. I don't remember what the food was, but I remember it was good food. And of course, the price differential between McDonald's and Ocean Air kind of underlines why service and service experience are such important value-add aspects of an operations process. So this goods service continuum is not only descriptive, it also helps us to think about where value comes from in the eyes of the customer. But more of that later in the course. So whatever operations process, whether it's a pure good or a pure service, how can we use the language of operations to describe that in a way that makes sense to others? Well, this is where the 4Vs framework comes in. And the starting point is to say, let's distinguish between the volume of activity related to a specific product market segment So if we're Taylor guitars, is it a high volume operation or a low volume operation? High volume operation, well, they build about 2,000 guitars a week. So by definition, it's a high volume operation. But the characteristics are dictated by that high volume operation. It tends to be a lot of repeatability, standardization, very capital intensive, and every step of the process is clearly documented. Now, if we go to the other extreme of a low volume operation, a luthier in my hometown of Coventry may only make 3 guitars a year. Now, no 2 guitars are the same. They're customized to the end user, to the customer's requirements. There's no highly automated technology. You know, having visited a luthier, it's a woodworking shop with general purpose tools. So you really rely a lot on the skill of the individual, and of course, they're very expensive per unit to produce. The second V is that of variety. So let's think about low variety. It means that when we're producing, let's stick with guitars, when we're producing guitars, ostensibly they're all much the same body shape, same type of neck or same shape of neck, same head, and they're all 6-string or 12-string. So again, we can have a well-defined, routinized process. If we've got high variety, a luthier may make not just 6-string guitars, but may make lutes, may make baritone guitars, may make tenor guitars. And so there, what we're doing is we're aligning our processes with the specific needs of the customer. So that's what we mean by variety. How different from an operations point of view are the products? Sometimes students get confused about variety in terms of what the product looks like at the end. No, this is to do with how different the processes are. Classic example would be pizza. Every pizza is the same. It's a base with tomato, cheese, and a mixture of toppings. So from an operations point of view, every pizza is exactly the same. We go through exactly the same process, through the same routines, the same controls, the same capital equipment. But the customers may all get very different pizzas, from pepperoni to 4 cheese to vegan. So we perceive that there's a difference. From an operations point of view, there is no difference. The third V is that of variation. This is concerned with whether variation in demand is very high, whether we therefore need to change capacity. We need to hold stock in anticipation of customers arriving, or we need employees to be waiting in case customers come into our service operation. At the other extreme, low variation is where we have pretty stable demand. So think about a bakery that bakes standard loaves of bread. Demand for bread is pretty static, so it's very low variation. Then the final V is that of visibility or customer contact. To what extent is the customer actively involved in the process? If they're not involved in the process, it has low visibility. Then we have a time lag between when we produce and when there is consumption. Let's think about that. Guitars, clearly there's very little customer contact for Taylor. They can manufacture guitars in anticipation of demand, or they can manufacture to order. If there's high customer contact, classic thing is going to the DMV or going to the dentist. By definition, you have to be at the dentist to have the service provided by the dentist. And if one customer takes a lot longer to receive their filling or have their root canal treatment than anticipated, then that causes a backlog. The amount of time that I'm waiting at a restaurant impacts on my level of satisfaction. One of the things, if you've ever been to Benihana, that you notice is that they're still very, very popular, very successful. There's always a long line waiting, but the wait staff know to bring samples of, say, sushi or garlic bread to make sure that customers are happy. So we have to think about the impact of visibility on our operations processes and on how well we perform. Now, this is where it gets really cool. When you bring these things together, what you see is that there is some form of synergy between the low volume, high variety, high variation, high visibility, and on the other extreme, the high volume, low variation, low variety, and low visibility. And this is really important. You will have seen, or you will see in one of the assignments, that you have a real opportunity to explore this framework and use it to explain why an organization has difficulty. And the reason organizations have difficulty is because they have misalignment between what their processes are intended to do and the demands that are placed on them, either because of new product introduction or by customers. So on one extreme, we have the high volume, low variety, low variation, low visibility type of process. And this might be a production line process. It might be a high volume batch operation. That's very distinct from a low volume, high variety, high variation, high visibility process. And as I will give you feedback on the assignments, you'll see the implications of distinguishing between high volume, low variety, and low volume, high variety.